I just had my very first class at the Guthrie, and it was for musical theater. And I just thought the instructor was so clever and had such a great mix of games and lessons learned. So it was childlike without being childish. And it was so fun. I want to make sure that I record it while it's still top of mind, because I envision that this could be really useful in coaching in the future, whether it's coaching cross-functional teams within corporations, or maybe something we do at the Ways Out of High School to kick off the speech season. So while it's top of mind, I'm going to talk about how he crafted that first 2-hour session. So we did the obvious and went around the room and introduced ourselves and talked about why we decided to join the musical theater class. And then we got in a circle, and he explained that the rules of this game were that you were going to call out the person's name across from you. And let's say that he's going to call to me. So he would say, Rachel, and then he would start walking. And me being across the room, he has called my name and is walking towards me, and I need to vacate my spot because he's going to stand in it. So I need to leave before he gets here. And the way that I do that is calling to a person who's across the circle from me, like Jonathan, and then I move, and Jonathan does the same, and units start going, right? And in order to make this easier, he had us go around the circle twice and say our name again, and said, try to remember a couple of names of the people across from you so that you can call out their names. So you didn't have to remember the name of everyone in the circle, just a couple of people across the room from you, so that you, when it was your turn to be called on, you could say Jonathan or Katie, right? And so you memorize those couple of names before we played, and then you can't pick, everyone's going to be picked once, nobody's going to be picked twice. And to show if you've been picked or not, everybody started with their hands up. And then once you were picked and you walked across the room and got into your position, your hands are going to be down so that people know that you've already been picked and don't need to be picked again. Additionally, if you forget somebody's name, you can start walking and go, what's your name again? And they'll yell back, Jonathan, and they go, Jonathan, and then they can move. So if you forget somebody's name, it's really not that big of a deal, and it's all a game and it's all fun, right? So we played that, Rachel, Jonathan, da, 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 and we did that, and then we did it again. And then the third time we did it, you would say the person's name and something that you did today. So he said, Rachel, I ate a sandwich. And then I say, Jonathan, I played pickleball. And then he says, Katie, I did. And so you're adding a little bit of complexity, a little bit of dialogue in order to play. And then the next time we did it, we didn't say the person's name at all. Instead, we said our favorite musical, or one of my favorite musicals. So he said, one of my favorite musicals is Hairspray. And I said, one of my favorite musicals is Chicago. And then Jonathan said, and one of my favorite musicals is Phantom of the Opera, right? But by now we all know who we come after, and so we don't need to say their name. And that was really fun. And we talked about what makes it easier. One is eye contact. One is say the gesture. One is being vocal and loud enough for others to hear you, speaking with conviction. One of it is listening. Maybe, so Jonathan, who's the last one in this example, he knows that I'm his cue, or rather he's the line that I respond to, but maybe the instructor who's starting this whole thing is the person that he's listening for, because he knows after my name is called, his name's going to be called, right? So he's listening ahead of it. I realized that I did miss a cycle. So we did the Rachel, Jonathan, Katie, we did that twice. And then the third time we did it, before we moved on to the name and what you did today. Before that, and after the 2 rounds of just the name, he had us like do a continuous loop. So somebody at the very end, there's like 20 people standing in a circle. At the very end, somebody said his name, the instructor's name was Steve. And when Steve was picked, he immediately went into Rachel, Jonathan. So you've got 20 people moving in a continuous cycle for, I think we did that for a couple of rounds. I think he called my name at least, I would say like 3 to 5 times. And it was just controlled chaos, and it was really fun. And it was a game without being childish, I guess. And that was a really great icebreaker. Everybody was doing name takes too, so that was helpful. So it was really fun. We talked about like traffic patterns and listening to each other and making eye contact and declaring, that kind of thing. The next thing he did was a paper plate game. This was probably my favorite game that we did of the day, because everybody puts a paper plate, and which is really light and airy, right, on their hand. And the first thing that we were asked to do was just walk around the room. And if your plate falls, you can't pick it up, you freeze. And then somebody who's walking past you, they can lean down and grip the paper plate and put it back on you. And it doesn't necessarily need to go on your hand. It can go on your head or your shoulder or whatever creative thing you want to do. But that's the only time somebody can grip the plate. Otherwise, you have to balance it like this. So the first round of the paper plate game is that there's 20 of us walking in this ballroom, and sometimes it falls, but then you help your fellow actor, right? That round was relatively easy, and we kind of learned about like traffic patterns, right? And moving around each other. 20 people is a pretty significant amount of people. The second rendition of this game is that we had the paper plate, but this time we need to turn and go low and come back up, right? So he would encourage us to do as many turns as you possibly can. That's the new way to be successful in this game. And obviously more plates dropped. And so we had to help out each other out even more. And then, one of the things that he said was like, there's theater going on every single day of every year, which means that there is a mistake made on stage every single day, and probably at every single moment. You will never have a perfect and pristine play. That will just never happen, right? But we have to pretend that mistakes are intentional, right? So if you drop your plate, you don't freak out. You just calmly look at it as if that was meant to be. Your fellow actor comes and helps you out, and you continue as if it were totally normal. And if there were an audience watching us, they would think that it was also normal. It wouldn't trigger for them, rather than like if you dropped it and you went like, oh, and you have to get it, like that's different than just moving forward as if nothing has happened, right? Super sweet and easy. I really liked that meaning behind the game. Okay, so now we've just walked around. Second rendition, we walked around, turn, gotten low, come back up. And then the third rendition is that you would have to swap paper plates with a partner, have them both bounce, jump and, the third rendition is that you turn, you get low, and you jump, right? And of course, more paper plates are dropping. Fourth rendition, you swap paper plates with somebody, you jump and high five in the air, land, spin, drop low, and continue on. And now we're getting a little bit more into the choreography of a piece and working with someone else, not just moving around each other and helping when needed. We're actually like working together and coordinating. And this was just, I don't know why, but it was really fun. I was super entertained by this experience. Okay, so then that was the end of us moving as like one big group. And then he broke 20 of us up into 4 different groups. I was in group 2, and he said, you're going to create your very own choreography. And what that looks like is the 4 people who are in your group, you need to pass the your paper plates to each other 3 times. One needs to be high, one needs to be mid, and one needs to be low. Additionally, we talked about different structures. So you have a horizontal line, you have a vertical line to the audience, you have an triangle, you have an inverted triangle, you have an every other window. So he wrote on the whiteboard, almost like we were prepping for football, like the X's and how everyone could stand in a bunch of different options. So it was about figure out how you want to get into that formation. Like, is everybody walking like this? Are we gliding? How are we sliding? How are we in movement together? And then get into that very first formation, hand over the plates at pick your first high, medium, or low, switch your plates, and then get into your next formation. So some people, everybody put a hand in a circle and they kind of walked in a circle, and then they were in a horizontal line for the next one, and they passed their paper plates forward. For example, this time for them it was at mid-level. And then again, you glide, slide, do this, whatever it takes to get into your third formation, and you pass it at the final height, whatever that would be. So it was really fun to see these 4 different groups with four to five people each come up with different ways of doing it. And what I loved about it is that it didn't feel intimidating because we had slowly worked our way up to here, and he had kind of given us the formula for how to make it work, right? The different structures and also the different levels and the requirements of passing a paper plate. So everybody created their own choreography. We showed the choreography to one another. It was fun to see what other people had come up with. And then he had us take away the paper plates, and he's like, now I want you to do it again. And now that you don't have that restriction, see what changes and what you want to do. He also changed the music at this point. So previously it had been the Hallelujah song, and then he switched it to fast-paced one. So he's like, see how tempo changes it, see how not having a paper plate to contend with changes it, and you had to work together within your little group to change the choreography. So we changed the choreography, and again, we performed, and all 4 groups performed, and we all watched how that was different. And that was kind of the end of the paper plate game. And so we've now played 2 games. One was the being in a circle game, one was the paper plate game, and this last one, he brought up the last song in Hairspray about when they all come together and say, you can't stop the music from da 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 da, right? It's about segregation being over, and we're going to be together, and it's just this big celebration and win and triumph at the end of the musical. And he said, we're now going to split into 2 large groups, and group 1 will do the first, I want to say the first half of the song, but it was probably the first quarter, really. It was, this long in terms of lyrics. And then group 2 will do the second portion, an equally long portion. And think through, we talked about what are the imagery that the lyricist used, right? It was about avalanches and oceans and rivers and sun. And so that is probably going to inform some of your choreography, right? You've got the river and you've got the sun. And we also talked about the time zone was like time era was the 50s. So maybe, some 50s doing the twist movement would be appropriate. Also, what do the words mean and what story can you tell? And so, we talked about the metaphors in the song, the era of the song, what the song means and the story, and coming together in the celebration, and how can you show that? So then we split into our 2 groups. What my group did is that we had the youngs and the olds, and the youngs were very energetic, and we were like, you can't do this. And then they grabbed us and spun us and convinced us to dance with them. And then there was a point where we said, "You can't stop the beat." We did that together, and something like this. Anyway, the point is that like the youngs and the olds were doing the same motion together, which he pointed out, when you guys are all doing the same motion together, that makes more of a point and a visual emphasis. So think about what you're emphasizing. And for us, that was the story of the youngs and the olds finally coming together and agreeing that you can't stop the beat. It's like the river and the ocean and other lyrics I can't remember. And so that was our story. I really liked it. I thought it was unique and creative and visually interesting and cognitively interesting in terms of the story. The second group, what they did was they didn't move into their formations as much. It felt a little bit stiff and stagnant, but what I did like is that they took two main characters, and one was Caucasian and one was Black, and they brought them forward because they talked about the NAACP in the section of dialogue and lyrics that they got. So they emphasized that portion. And yeah, that was really great. And I just had a blast. The time went by so fast. I felt like we were doing games, silly games, without me feeling like I was being like talked down to or ridiculed, or like I was being treated like a child. That's what I mean by like it being childlike without it being childish. And I also just thought it was incredibly clever, smart, and wise how the instructor structured the class. Because if you think about it, we did the first game that we played was standing in a circle and doing the basics, but you had to like pay attention so you're engaged, right? Then we played the paper plate game, and that got us into like movement, but still with fun and with helping one another. And the choreography with the plates, you had to work together in your small group and come up with an agreement of how we're going to get into these different structures and pass the plates and what structures we're going to use, blah, blah. And then that set us up for success because we had the foundations here and here to then create a chunk of choreography, right? How do we tell this story? How do we incorporate what we learned? How do we use our different levels? How do we use structure? How do we layer on storytelling on top of this? And so I just felt like if he had started here and said, "Great, welcome to musical theater one-on-one, you are going to choreograph this song in Hairspray, ready, set, go," everybody would have been like, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do." But by starting with this like icebreaker engagement thing and then doing paper plates and then doing this, it was like he built up our confidence one baby step along the way. And it was like a good pace. And I just really loved it. It was so fun and useful. And yeah, and then we wrapped. So I think it would be good for adults to play, and that's why I'm recording this, because I envision that will want to use something like that maybe in the future when I'm working with groups in the professional setting, or again maybe with the White speech team as kind of a kickoff next year. But it was just really fun. That's it. Yeah, I hope future Rachel finds this helpful. Okay, ciao for now.